Hello. Alright, I'm gonna try one last time, I guess. My phone keeps filling up, and I'm gonna try to finish this Hamilton broadcast. Basically, Hamilton founded American conservatism, but nowadays, the Democrats and even a lot of the leftists subscribe to a lot of the conservative ideology, of basically authoritarianism. So, um, so it all kind of overlaps, and so it makes sense that a lot of the Democrats and even people on the left think of Hamilton as a hero, because a lot of people ostensibly on the left subscribe to authoritarian ideology, which is basically right wing. Basically Hamilton was against democracy. His party, the Federalists, which included George Washington, John Adams, I guess it included probably most of the leaders of early America, but certainly not all. Not Jefferson, not Franklin, not Paine, not Madison. Although a lot of them were closer to Hamilton earlier on and then radicalized, just as Hamilton himself may have radicalized somewhat. So, one thing is important, I think, it's important to separate the Bill of Rights from the Constitution, because the Bill of Rights were passed after the Constitution was passed, largely as a to placate people who were opposed to the Constitution, because one of the main reasons that people pointed to for why they were opposed to the Constitution was it had no Bill of Rights. Hamilton's Constitution had no Bill of Rights. It just basically had a Bill of Power. It just gave the rights of government, but it didn't give the rights of the people. So the Bill of Rights was like an answer, and in many ways an antidote to the Constitution itself, or to the original Constitution. Although you could say that the original Constitution was the Continental Congress, and it was maybe an unwritten constitution like they have in the UK, but it was maybe much more radical than the written document that was, signed in the Constitutional Convention. Just the fact that the Constitution was done in secret, they didn't even tell people what they were doing. They didn't even say, oh yeah, elect these people so they can create this Constitution. No, it was just just elect some people to determine something, future things, and then boom, they come out and they're like, ta-da, guess what, plebes, you have a new set of laws. I don't know if the federal Constitution succeeded in all what it intended to in terms of stopping democracy, but it definitely stopped the march of unicameralism. It basically became the gold standard, and so all the unicameral governments steadily dwindled out of existence as being considered too quaint and antiquated or whatever. So yeah, Hamilton is a founder of like basically anti-poor politics, you could say, in the US. And so it's deeply troubling, you know, that they're brainwashing children to like sing songs in his praise. You know, like I've seen like kids, you know, getting into the Hamilton thing very early because I'm sure they're great songs, or they might be great songs, and anyway they have a tune and whatever, so I'm sure they're catchy, and but it's terrible, you know, like this is somebody who despised poor people, didn't want them to have any power, wanted us to be completely enthralled to, you know, the very global wealthy elite, global capital, through the Bank of the United States, which, you know, Jefferson destroyed, but then it was maybe John Quincy Adams resurrected it, and then Jackson destroyed it, and then, you know, I mean, probably every president basically resurrected it. Certainly, Woodrow Wilson resurrected it with the Federal Reserve. So, you know, and nowadays it's funny because there's actually, I think people who are to the right of center are more likely to understand the dangers of the Federal Reserve than avowed leftists. But it was really it was the leftists, like, I mean, Jefferson identified as a leftist, and Jackson, I mean, they were terrible people in many ways, just like Stalin or Mao, or I mean, hopefully not that bad, but they definitely were flawed people, but they were leftists, and they were right in that regard. So yeah, I mean, I think that like American political history is not even that complicated, and yet it's just like almost it's like cultishly suppressed, you know, like in almost every way by everyone, because the fact of it is, it was a very leftist, there was a very strong leftist movement in early America, and there was also a very strong conservative movement within the revolution. Not very necessarily very popular within the revolution, but very strong because it was popular with the wealthy who control the revolution as they control everything, you know, or at least have undue power. And Hamilton led that, you know, the march for plutocracy, for the idea that the wealthy should control everything. So yeah, I mean, like, he's pretty terrible. I think one book I would suggest about this would be, it's called The American Aurora. It's like a newspaper. It's a mix of actual history and historical fiction. So it's very a little confusing, very playful, but also very fascinating. The information it has about the early reactionary movement and the early, you know, radical movement in the US. Because it's hard to find, you know, like books that really explain it. It's like, it seems like the left and the right are both heavily invested in denying it, because maybe it's like if the right, obviously, if the right acknowledges the radical nature of the of a lot of the American revolutionaries, then they have to admit that they themselves are closer to the British Tory, that they're kind of basically traitors to American values. And on the left, if they admit it, then they have to look at maybe the descendants of those people and see that a lot of them are still poor and are living in like Appalachia and like middle America and are just totally demonized by the left. And a lot of the left would rather just demonize those people than actually deal with them as being descendants of previously revolutionary masses. So for whatever reason, but I think it's incumbent on us to uncover the truth and to whatever extent we can, revive the best of the traditions of, I mean, I wouldn't really say Jeffersonian. I mean, obviously we know like Jefferson was very flawed and he was just leading the forces of the basically radical Whigs that had already existed. He was kind of like following Franklin's footsteps and Thomas Paine. So anyway, I do think it's important to like recognize that right and left are, at least like 300 years old, basically, like in terms of like liberalism and conservatism going back to the UK or Britain during the 1600s, and right and left being like a transatlantic phenomenon in the late 1700s that largely overlapped with liberal and conservative, although in some ways, in some instances, went further than the liberals, and in some ways, yeah. But I better cut it short, end it, just in case my phone's going to spaz out again from having too much stuff on it. But the point is, like, it's not okay for us to allow Hamilton to be lionized as a hero any more than it's okay for us to have Confederate statues. Those statues should come down. They should have at least be put in a museum or something. They should not be idolized or venerated in any way, and neither should Hamilton. Maybe he did some good things, I don't know, but for the most part, the role that he played was very, very bad. He just was, for the most reactionary, heartless side of American politics. So it's not good that all these kids have been brainwashed, and it behooves us to, to tell them the truth and try to dispel these lies that have just gone unchallenged in the mainstream because they are, convenient for people in power. It was the Hamilton group or something, that there was some like Hamilton Foundation or something that was a powerful group behind Hillary Clinton in like 2015 and 16. And it makes sense why the kind of neocons who have flocked to the Democrats lately would love, Alexander Hamilton, because he was a very oligarchic person, plutocratic person. He wanted, he didn't trust poor people, and he wanted a system that kept power as far away from the poor as possible. And, kept the richest of the rich in power as long as possible. So anyway, that's the truth. And thank you for, if anybody's watched this far, I know it's been long, but yeah, I would say look into it. Definitely check out that book if you're really interested, The American Aurora. And but I mean, yeah, Hamilton was a terrible person, and it's disgusting that people are putting him on a pedestal. You know, Benjamin Franklin actually opposed slavery, not just in some private letters or some shit or whatever Hamilton did. Maybe Hamilton did something for that, but to my knowledge, he didn't do anything nearly on the level that Franklin did. Franklin helped found a society, anti-slavery society, and I don't think Hamilton ever joined it. So yeah, Franklin was the leader of the anti-slavery forces. And Franklin too, just like Hamilton, I think they both owned slaves at some point at least. So it's a mess, but yeah, definitely Hamilton he's just being you know, rehabilitated because he suits the aristocrats. He's the only founding father that isn't, or he's one of the founding fathers that's the least threatening to the plutocratic element who control everything to this day. So anyway, fuck Hamilton, and long live the revolution.